Welcome back, everybody. We're diving into something a little different today. You wanted to unpack culpa mia, or My Fault,
My bad.
the Spanish romance movie.
Yeah.
Specifically, you guys were curious about why it's so popular, even with some mixed reviews out there.
Yes.
Especially, you wanted to look at this from a female perspective.
Yes.
So that's what we're going to be tackling today.
Great.
We've got a whole bunch of online discussions about the movie, so we've got like a good mix of takes here.
Yeah.
Some people who absolutely loved it,
Yeah.
some people who absolutely hated it, and some people kind of in the middle.
Absolutely. I think culpa mia is an interesting case study because,
Yeah?
I mean, it's really popular. There's no denying that. But it's had this like mixed bag of reviews.
Yeah.
And it really is sort of this cultural lightning rod. People feel very strongly one way or the other about this movie.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so interesting for a deep dive like this, because there's a lot to dig into. So I guess a good place to start is just like what people generally liked about it.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And it seems that a lot of people thought it was really pretty to look at, the scenery.
Right.
It takes place in Spain.
Beautiful Spain.
So gorgeous locations, lots of cool cars. They spent a lot of time on the soundtrack.
Uh-huh.
So just kind of like a generally visually appealing movie.
Yeah. And I think for some viewers, it seems like it was just a good way to de-stress.
Right.
Kind of escape into a different world for a couple hours.
That makes sense. And you know what's funny? You mentioned specifically female viewers, because it does seem like online,
Right.
a lot of the buzz, a lot of the people talking about the movie are women. So yeah, it makes you wonder if there is something about it that particularly resonates with them. Maybe it's just the romance genre.
Yeah. Or maybe there's something else about the characters or the story that's attracting that audience. We should definitely look out for that.
Yeah. That's a good point to keep in mind as we go through this.
For sure.
So I guess let's address the elephant in the room.
Okay.
A lot of people said the acting and the dialogue felt a little lacking.
Oh, yeah, I see that.
And this seems to be true, like across the board. Both people who watched it dubbed
Okay.
and people who watched it in the original Spanish.
Yeah, the acting and the dialogue definitely seems to be a point of contention for a lot of people. Some found it cheesy, natural.
Yeah.
While others were willing to overlook it because they were just so into other aspects of the movie.
Right. It's like, okay, it's not the best acting.
Right.
But like, I'm here for the romance and the scenery.
Exactly.
Speaking of which, a lot of people were very into
Oh, yeah.
the male lead, Gabriel.
Yeah.
Like very into him. One person called him their new Wattpad king, which I thought was funny.
Oh, the Wattpad king? Yeah, that's a very revealing phrase, I think. It kind of hints at the origins of the movie.
Yeah.
You know, this is based on a story that was on Wattpad. And so there's a certain set of expectations that come with that.
Absolutely. And Wattpad is known for those very passionate, often like very fast-paced romances.
Uh-huh.
Which kind of leads us into the other big criticism.
Okay.
A lot of people felt like Noah and Nick's relationship
Got it.
developed way too fast in the movie.
Oh, interesting.
Like it was just a whirlwind.
Okay.
And there wasn't enough of a foundation there for a lot of viewers.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair point. A lot of people felt like the relationship just went from 0 to 60 in a blink of an eye. There wasn't really enough there to make you believe they were actually in love.
Right.
You know, beyond just that initial attraction and then just kind of like all the drama that ensues.
Yeah, it's like they skipped over all this stuff that makes
Right.
you really believe they're falling for each other.
Exactly.
Like all the little moments.
The intimacy, the connection.
Yeah, and I wonder if this is something that maybe ties back to that female perspective you mentioned earlier. Because maybe women are just a little more attuned to those subtleties of like how relationships develop.
Right.
And when those are missing, it just kind of feels jarring.
That is such a good point. I never thought of it that way. But it totally makes sense. Like maybe there is this like gendered element to the way we watch and perceive these romantic stories.
It's really interesting to consider.
Yeah. So, okay, obviously a lot of people had criticisms about the movie. But clearly a lot of people also really liked it.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And this kind of brings us to the idea of guilty pleasures.
Oh, yeah.
You know those movies you watch and you're like, this isn't very good, Betty.
Right, great.
I'm enjoying it. Like, you know it's not a good movie objectively, but you still enjoy watching it.
Exactly.
One of the sources even said, it's so bad it's good.
perfect.
Which I thought was a great way to put it.
Yeah, it really captures that feeling. And it seems like a lot of the people who loved Culpa Mia,
right,
they kind of felt that way. They were like, yeah, it's not a cinematic masterpiece, but I had fun.
Yeah, it's entertaining.
And I wonder if there's something about these, like, guilty pleasure movies, especially romance movies, that particularly appeals to women.
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I think they just offer a kind of fantasy escape from everyday life.
Right.
You know, everything is like very heightened.
Right.
The passion is intense.
Yeah.
The romance is all consuming.
Yeah.
The people are impossibly good looking.
Right.
So it's just like this temporary vacation for your mind.
Totally. Totally. And, you know, speaking of escape,
a
lot of people brought up the fact that Culpa Mia is based on a Wattpad trilogy.
Oh, right.
And some people who felt like the movie was lacking. They felt like the books
interesting.
were actually better.
Okay.
And had more depth and filled in some of those gaps.
I see.
Which makes sense, I guess.
Yeah.
Because if you're already a fan of the books,
right.
You're going to be more forgiving of the movie, right?
Absolutely. It highlights how powerful familiarity with a story can be when you're watching an adaptation. If you already love the book,
right,
you might overlook some flaws in the movie.
Right, because you can kind of like fill in those gaps with your own imagination.
Exactly.
Because you already have this connection to the story.
Exactly.
So, okay, let's talk a little bit about genre expectations. Because obviously romance, as a genre, it often relies on certain tropes and cliches.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Which isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
But it is something to be aware of. And one of the sources brought up a concern that Culpa Mia maybe romanticizes some unhealthy relationship dynamics.
Oh, interesting.
Especially for younger viewers who might be watching it.
Yeah, that's a valid point. It brings up those questions of like, what responsibility do filmmakers have when they're depicting relationships on screen? Because, you know, just because you enjoy a movie doesn't mean that you endorse everything that's happening in it.
Absolutely.
But still, it's important to be aware of what messages a film might be sending.
Totally.
Especially to younger audiences.
Absolutely. And that's something that we can talk about with any kind of media, not just Culpa Mia. But going back to this specific deep dive, I thought it was interesting to see how people were kind of grappling with that. Like they enjoyed the movie, but they were also aware of some of the potential downsides.
Yeah. Trying to find that balance.
It's tricky, right? Like you want to enjoy something, but also you want to be aware of what it's saying.
Right.
And, you know, it's interesting because some people in these discussions were actually asking for, like, recommendations for other movies, like Culpa Mia.
Oh, interesting.
And specifically, movies that were also based on Wattpad stories.
Oh, wow. So they really liked that specific vibe.
It seems like it.
That's fascinating. It makes you think that there's this, like, real hunger for this type of story. You know, this blend of romance and drama and escapism.
And it is interesting that it's specifically coming from Wattpad, because that's definitely like a newer thing, you know, where these online platforms are kind of influencing what we see. And
absolutely. Like, Wattpad is basically becoming a factory for these kinds of romance stories.
Certainly.
And Culpa Mia is like a perfect example of how those stories can kind of break through and find a bigger audience.
And I wonder, you know, what is it about these Wattpad romances that really grabs people? And especially, you know, going back to that female perspective.
Yeah.
Like, is there something about it that, like, really speaks to women?
Yeah. Well, some people were saying it's kind of a reflection of, like, where we are culturally. Like, maybe there's this longing for a type of romance that feels really hard to find these days. Like, you know, this kind of all-consuming, passionate love story. Like a fairy tale.
Yeah. It's like, we want those big emotions and grand gestures that maybe aren't as common in real life.
It's like we're craving that fantasy.
Totally. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with a little...
Absolutely not. I mean, sometimes it's good to just escape into a different world for a bit.
For sure.
Explore those emotions. Let yourself get swept up in the story.
Totally. I think that's a really good point. And as long as we're being like, aware of the difference between fiction and reality.
Right. Exactly.
Then there's nothing wrong with enjoying
exactly
a fun, over-the-top love story, even if it's a little cheesy
exactly
or predictable or whatever.
Yeah. You don't always have to watch
right.
a cinematic masterpiece. Sometimes you just want to have some fun.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the big takeaways from this deep dive. Culpa Mia might not be perfect, but it definitely got people talking about all sorts of things, like genre expectations and guilty pleasures and the role of escapism in our entertainment.
Totally. And also those really interesting questions about how gender and these online platforms are shaping these stories we're seeing.
And I think ultimately that's what makes something really engaging.
Absolutely.
It's not just about whether it's objectively good or bad.
Yeah.
It's about whether it starts a conversation.
Right. Makes you think. Makes you feel something.
Makes you feel something. Exactly. So to wrap things up, I guess I'll leave you with a question.
Okay, shoot.
What do you think the popularity of Culpa Mia and movies like it says about what we're looking for these days in our entertainment?
Yeah.
Are we just drawn to the surface level stuff? Like the passionate romance? Or is there something deeper going on? We're looking for connection or intensity or just a break from reality?
That's such a good question.
Yeah. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so let us know in the comments.
Yeah, tell us what you think.
And that about wraps up our deep dive into Culpa Mia.
Great discussion.
We hope you found it interesting. And keep those deep dive requests coming. We'll see you next time.